Callum Quinn was absolutely certain that his sister had finally lost her mind when she cornered him in the barn and announced she had arranged a blind date for him. "You did what?" he asked, pausing mid-motion as he forked hay into the horse stall, straw dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the gaps in the wooden walls. "A blind date," Maeve repeated, her hands planted firmly on her hips in that way that meant she would not be dissuaded no matter what arguments he presented. "You are 26 years old, Callum. You have not courted anyone since Margaret moved to the coastal settlements 3 years ago, and you spend every waking moment either working this farm or helping rebuild the village after the raids last winter. You need to actually live your life." Callum set down his pitchfork and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his temple. Their farm sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, a frontier settlement that had only recently begun to recover from the devastating attacks that had destroyed nearly half the buildings and killed a dozen people. He had been working from dawn until well past dark most days, helping neighbors repair their homes while maintaining his own land. The idea of sitting through an awkward dinner with some woman Maeve had selected seemed like the last thing he needed. "I appreciate the concern, truly, but I do not have time for this nonsense," he said, reaching for the pitchfork again. Maeve stepped forward and grabbed his arm. "You will make time. Tomorrow evening at the Crooked Antler, I have already arranged everything. The tavern." "Maeve, that hardly seems. It is neutral ground," she interrupted. "Comfortable, familiar, and you are going whether you like it or not. I did not raise you after mother and father passed just to watch you wither away into some lonely hermit who talks only to his horses." Callum could not help but smile despite his irritation. Maeve was only 2 years his senior, but she had taken on the role of guardian with fierce dedication when their parents had died in a sickness that swept through the region when he was 16. She had postponed her own marriage for years to ensure he could keep the farm, only recently wedding Thomas, the blacksmith's son, who now worked the forge in the village center. "Fine," he conceded with a heavy sigh. "One dinner. But when this goes terribly, you are not to breathe a word about arranging another." Maeve's face broke into a brilliant smile. "Wonderful. Tomorrow at sunset. Wear your good shirt, the blue one, and for the love of all that is sacred, wash your hair." She swept out of the barn before he could protest further, leaving him alone with the horses and a growing sense of dread about what his sister had set in motion. The next evening found Callum standing outside the Crooked Antler, tugging uncomfortably at the collar of his blue shirt and second-guessing every decision that had led him to this moment. The tavern was one of the few buildings that had survived the raids intact, a sturdy structure of thick timber and river stone that served as the social heart of Millbrook. Warm light spilled from its windows, and he could hear the familiar sounds of conversation and laughter from within. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The tavern keeper, a rotund man named Bernard, looked up from behind the bar and gave him a knowing wink that made Callum's stomach twist with embarrassment. How many people had Maeve told about this arrangement? "Your table is in the back corner," Bernard called out. "Private-like. Can I get you something to settle your nerves?" "Just water for now," Callum replied, weaving between tables filled with villagers enjoying their evening meals. He recognized most of them. Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant this date would be discussed and dissected for weeks to come. The back corner table was indeed private, tucked into an alcove with a view of the room but separated enough to allow for conversation. Callum sat down with his back to the wall, a habit from his brief time serving in the militia during the border conflicts, and tried to calm his racing thoughts. He had no idea who Maeve had found for him. Most of the unmarried women in Millbrook he had known since childhood, and while they were perfectly pleasant, he had never felt any particular spark with any of them. Perhaps she had reached out to one of the neighboring settlements, though that seemed unlikely given the difficulty of travel in the frontier regions. The door to the tavern opened again, and Callum glanced up automatically, his breath caught in his throat. The woman who entered was unlike anyone he had ever seen in Millbrook or any of the surrounding human settlements. She stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that spoke of incredible strength. Her skin was a deep, rich green, like the forests in summer, and her black hair was pulled back into a thick braid that fell past her shoulders. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her ears came to gentle points. She wore simple clothing, a tunic and trousers that looked handmade and well-worn, and she carried herself with a curious mixture of confidence and uncertainty. She was an orc. The tavern had gone suddenly, noticeably quiet. Every conversation had stopped, every eye had turned toward the door. Callum could feel the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. Orcs were not welcome in Millbrook, not after the raids, not after the deaths and destruction. The fact that the winter attacks had been carried out by human bandits dressed in orcish armor to frame the orc clans for their crimes had eventually come to light, but prejudice and fear were not so easily dismissed. The orc woman's dark eyes swept across the room, and Callum saw her swallow hard, saw the way her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. She looked like she was considering turning around and walking right back out the door. Before he could second-guess the impulse, Callum stood up and raised his hand. "Over here," he called out, his voice carrying across the silent room. Those dark eyes found him, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she began walking toward him, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floorboards. The crowd parted before her like water around a stone, people pulling back with expressions ranging from shock to outright hostility. As she approached the table, Callum could see more details. She was younger than he had first thought, probably close to his own age. There were calluses on her hands, the kind that came from hard physical labor, and there was something in her eyes of vulnerability, a nervousness that reminded him achingly of exactly how he had been feeling just moments before. "Callum Quinn?" she asked, her voice deep and melodic with just the slightest tremor of uncertainty. "Yes," he replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit down." She lowered herself into the chair with careful precision, as though afraid she might break it. The furniture groaned slightly under her weight but held. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the surrounding conversation slowly resuming at a much lower volume as people continued to stare. "I am Gara," she said finally. "Gara of the Stonefist clan, or I was. I no longer belong to them." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Gara," Callum said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Despite the shock, despite the stares, despite everything, there was something about her that intrigued him. "I apologize. I did not know my sister arranged this, and she did not tell me. She did not tell you I was an orc," Gara finished, a sad smile crossing her features. "I understand. If she had, you would not have come." "That is not true," Callum said, though he was not entirely certain if he was being honest. Would he have come if Maeve had told him? He wanted to believe he would have, but the truth was more complicated than that. Gara's expression suggested she did not quite believe him, but before either of them could say more, Bernard appeared at their table with 2 mugs of ale. He set them down with more force than necessary, sloshing liquid onto the wood. "Not sure what you are thinking, Quinn, but some folks here are not happy about this," the tavern keeper muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Just thought you should know." "Then those folks are welcome to mind their own business," Callum replied evenly, meeting Bernard's gaze until the older man looked away and retreated back to his bar. When Callum turned back to Gara, he found her watching him with an expression of surprise. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Callum replied. "You are my guest, and you have done nothing to deserve rudeness." He picked up his mug and took a sip, then grimaced. The ale was watered down and bitter. "Though I am beginning to think Bernard's hospitality is not what it used to be." A small sound escaped Gara, and it took Callum a moment to realize she was laughing. The sound was like warm honey, rich and genuine, and it transformed her entire face. When she smiled, really smiled, her eyes crinkled at the corners and the nervousness fell away, revealing someone open and kind. "Your sister," Gara began, wrapping her large hands around her mug but not drinking. "Maeve. She came to the farm where I work. I tend the fields and help with the heavy labor for the Merrick family, about 5 miles south of here. She said she knew someone who might appreciate meeting me. She did not mention you were human." Callum could not help it. He laughed at that, a genuine bark of amusement that drew more stares. "It seems my sister is more devious than I gave her credit for. She trapped us both." "Perhaps," Gara agreed, and now she did take a sip of her ale, her nose wrinkling in distaste at the flavor. "Or perhaps she saw something we could not see ourselves." There was a weight to those words, a suggestion of deeper meaning, but before Callum could explore it further, a commotion erupted near the bar. 3 men he recognized: Edmund, Pierce, and Garrett. All young farmers who had lost family in the raids were standing and pointing in their direction. "This is not right," Edmund shouted, his face flushed with anger and drink. "We do not break bread with orcs in this town, not after what they did." "The orcs did not do anything," Callum called back, his voice calm but firm. "That was proven. It was bandits wearing orcish armor to start a war between our peoples." "Lies," Pierce spat. "Look at her. They are all the same, all monsters." Gara had gone very still across from him, her expression carefully neutral, but Callum could see the way her jaw tightened, could see the hurt in her eyes even as she tried to hide it. "You need to leave," Garrett added, directing his words at Gara. "We do not want your kind here." Callum stood up slowly, his hands open and non-threatening at his sides. "Gara is here as my guest, and she has every right to be here. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to take it up with me outside." The silence that followed was absolute. Callum was not a large man, not compared to some of the laborers and farmers in Millbrook, but he had a reputation for being steady and fair. He had served in the militia, had fought in the border conflicts, and people respected him. The fact that he was willing to defend an orc woman shocked them all into momentary stillness. Then Thomas, Maeve's husband, stood up from his own table across the room. "Callum is right," the blacksmith said firmly. "The lady has done nothing wrong, and she deserves to be treated with respect. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me as well." One by one, a few other voices joined in agreement. Not many, but enough. Edmund and his friends looked around, realized they were outnumbered, and sat back down with muttered curses and dark looks. Callum exhaled slowly and sat back down, his heart pounding. Across from him, Gara was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. "You do not know me. We only just met. Why would you risk your standing in this community for a stranger?" Callum considered the question carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because no one deserves to be treated like that, especially not for something they did not do." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Also, my sister would never forgive me if I let our first date end in a brawl." Gara's expression softened, and she reached across the table, her large hand covering his. Her skin was warm, her touch gentle despite her obvious strength. "Thank you," she said simply. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined across the table, before Gara slowly withdrew. The tavern had returned to its normal noise level, though Callum could still feel eyes on them from every direction. "Tell me about yourself," he said, deciding to push forward as though nothing had happened. "You said you work for the Merrick family," Gara nodded, seeming grateful for the change in subject. "Yes, for about 8 months now. I came to this region after I was cast out from my clan." She said it matter-of-factly, but Callum could hear the pain underneath the words. "Cast out? Why?" She looked down at her hands, tracing a finger along the wood grain of the table. "The Stonefist clan believes in the old ways. We do not associate with humans except in battle. When I argued that we should seek peace, that we should try to understand the humans who live in the borderlands, my father, the clan chief, said I was a disgrace. He gave me a choice: renounce my beliefs or leave. So I left." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Callum said quietly. "It was," Gara admitted. "Orcs are tribal by nature. To be without a clan is to be without identity, without purpose. I wandered for several weeks, taking odd jobs where I could find them, facing hatred and fear wherever I went. Then I met Edith Merrick. Her husband had died the previous year, and she was struggling to manage the farm alone with her 2 young children. She needed help, and she did not care that I was an orc. She only cared that I was willing to work hard." "She sounds like a good woman," Callum observed. "She is," Gara agreed, a fond smile crossing her face. "She treats me like family. Her children, Lily and James, they do not see me as a monster. They just see Gara, who tells them stories and lets them climb on my shoulders and teaches them to tend the garden." Her expression dimmed slightly. "But I know I am a burden to her as well. The other farmers will not help her because she employs an orc. She cannot sell her goods at the market easily because people will not buy from someone who keeps my kind around. I have made her life harder, even as I try to help." Callum thought about that, about the courage it must have taken for Edith Merrick to welcome an orc into her home, knowing the social consequences. He thought about Gara, choosing exile over abandoning her principles. And he thought about his sister, who had somehow known that these 2 lonely people might find something meaningful in each other. "What about you?" Gara asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "Your sister said you run your family farm." "I do," Callum confirmed. "My parents died when I was 16, and I have been working the land ever since. It is not much wheat, barley, some vegetables, a few chickens and pigs, but it is mine. Maeve helped me keep it running until she married Thomas last year. Now it is just me and the work." "You must be very dedicated," Gara said. "Farming is not easy, especially alone." "Dedicated or stubborn, depending on who you ask," Callum replied with a wry smile. "Maeve would say stubborn. She worries that I work too much and live too little, which is why we are sitting here right now." "And are you glad we are?" Gara asked, her dark eyes meeting his directly. "Sitting here, I mean, truly?" It was a brave question, one that demanded an honest answer. Callum took a moment to really look at her, at the strength in her features, at the vulnerability in her eyes, at the way she held herself like someone who had been hurt before and was terrified of being hurt again. "Yes," he said, and meant it completely. "I am glad. Surprised, definitely. A bit overwhelmed by how the evening has gone, but glad." The smile that spread across Gara's face was like sunrise after a long night, warm and hopeful and absolutely beautiful. "I am glad too," she admitted. They talked for hours after that, long after Bernard had stopped serving food and the crowd had thinned to just a few dedicated drinkers. Callum learned that Gara loved working with her hands, that she had a talent for wood carving and would create small figures of animals for the Merrick children. Gara learned that Callum had once dreamed of being a scholar, that he had taught himself to read from his mother's books, and still spent his rare, free evenings poring over whatever texts he could acquire from traveling merchants. They discovered they both enjoyed the quiet of early mornings, the satisfaction of hard work well done, the beauty of the frontier wilderness that surrounded their settlements. They argued playfully about the best way to grow tomatoes and whether horses or oxen were better for plowing fields. They shared stories of their childhoods, the losses they had endured, the hopes they still carried. When Bernard finally announced he was closing for the night, Callum was shocked to see how late it had become. The moon was high in the sky, stars scattered like diamond dust across the darkness. "I should walk you home," Callum said as they stepped out into the cool night air. "That is not necessary," Gara replied, but there was something in her voice that suggested she hoped he would insist. "It is dark and the roads are not always safe," Callum said. "Besides, I would like to." They walked side by side through the quiet streets of Millbrook, their footsteps echoing off the buildings. Callum was acutely aware of how close she was, of the way her arm occasionally brushed against his. When they reached the edge of town where the road split toward their respective farms, they both stopped. "This was unexpected," Gara said softly, looking down at him. "I came tonight thinking it would be a disaster, that I would sit through an uncomfortable hour and then leave, confirming what I already knew, that there is no place for someone like me in a human world." "And now?" Callum asked. "Now I am not so sure," she admitted. "You treated me with kindness and respect. You defended me when you did not have to. You talked to me like I was a person, not a monster. That is more than I dared to hope for." Callum reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Her hand was so much larger than his, calloused and strong, but her grip was gentle. "Would you like to do this again?" he asked. Talk, perhaps somewhere with less hostility next time." "I would like that very much," Gara said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "But Callum, you need to understand what you are risking. Being seen with me, showing me kindness, it will change how people see you. It already has after tonight. Some will respect you for it, but others will despise you. It will make your life harder." "Then my life will be harder," Callum said simply. "I spent years doing what was expected of me, staying safe, keeping my head down and working my farm. And I have been lonely, Gara, desperately lonely, though I did not want to admit it. Tonight, talking with you, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time. I felt happy. I felt interested in someone, curious about them, excited to learn more. I am not going to let fear or prejudice take that away." Gara's eyes were shining in the moonlight, and Callum realized with a start that she was fighting back tears. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before," she whispered. "Then the world has been foolish," Callum replied. They stood there in the quiet darkness, hands joined, and Callum felt something shift in his chest. This was the beginning of something, he knew. Something important, something that would change everything. And for the first time in years, he was not afraid of change. "There is a meadow near my farm," he said. "East side, past the wheat fields where wildflowers grow thick in the spring. Would you meet me there? Tomorrow afternoon, if you can get away from your work." "I will be there," Gara promised. They parted reluctantly, and Callum watched her walk away down the dark road until her figure disappeared into the night. Then he turned toward his own farm, his mind racing with everything that had happened, everything that might come next. When he arrived home, he found Maeve sitting on his porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. "I heard what happened at the tavern," she said as he climbed the steps. Thomas told me you nearly came to blows with Edmund and his friends. Nearly, but not quite, Callum replied, sitting down beside her. I should have told you she was an orc, Maeve admitted. I knew if I did you would refuse to go, but I met her, Callum, and I saw how kind she was, how lonely. And I thought of you, equally lonely, equally kind, and I hoped that maybe if you just met each other without all the prejudice and fear clouding things, you might see past what you have been taught to hate. Callum put his arm around his sister and pulled her close. You are meddlesome and manipulative and far too clever for your own good, he said affectionately. And you may have just changed my life. Maeve looked up at him, hope shining in her eyes. So it went well. It went terrifyingly, wonderfully, impossibly well, Callum admitted. I am seeing her again tomorrow. His sister's delighted laugh echoed across the quiet farmyard, and Callum could not help but join in, the sound of their shared joy carrying on the night wind like a promise of better things to come. The meadow was exactly as Callum had described it, a hidden gem tucked away from the main roads where wildflowers painted the ground in brilliant purples, yellows, and whites. Gara arrived first, nervous energy propelling her to pace back and forth among the blooms while she waited. She had spent the entire morning helping Edith with the planting, trying to focus on the work while her mind kept drifting back to the previous evening. No one had ever stood up for her the way Callum had. No one had ever looked at her with such open curiosity and interest, seeing past her green skin and tusks to the person underneath. It terrified her how much she wanted him after only one meeting. When Callum appeared at the edge of the meadow, Gara's heart did something complicated in her chest. He was dressed simply in work clothes, his brown hair slightly tousled by the wind, and he carried a basket over one arm. When he spotted her, his entire face lit up with a smile that made her feel warm all over. You came, he said as he approached, sounding genuinely relieved. Did you think I would not? Gara asked. I worried you might have thought better of it, Callum admitted. That in the light of day you might decide I was not worth the trouble. Gara shook her head firmly. I could say the same of you. I am the one who comes with complications, remember. Then we are both fools, Callum said with a grin. Fools who are here anyway. He gestured to a flat spot among the flowers. I brought lunch. Nothing fancy, just bread and cheese and some apples from my winter stores. I thought we could eat and talk without anyone staring at us or making threats. They settled down in the grass, and Gara was struck by how comfortable it felt, how natural. Callum spread out a cloth and began unpacking the basket, and they fell into easy conversation as they ate. He told her about his morning spent repairing a fence that his pigs kept breaking through, and she described the elaborate game of make-believe the Merrick children had invented that involved her pretending to be a dragon they had to defeat. You are good with children, Callum observed. I like them, Gara said simply. They have not yet learned to hate. To Lily and James, I am just Gara, who is big and strong and fun. They do not care about tribal conflicts or prejudice. I wish adults could see the world the way children do. Maybe some of us are learning too, Callum suggested quietly. They talked through the afternoon, the conversation flowing from topic to topic with easy grace. Gara found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, her fears about never finding a place where she belonged, her grief over losing her clan, her dreams of someday having a home and family of her own. Callum listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, offering comfort without empty platitudes. In turn, he told her about the loneliness of running the farm alone, about the weight of responsibility he had carried since his parents died, about the secret hope he harbored of someday traveling beyond the frontier to see what lay in the wider world. Why do you not go? Gara asked. You are not bound here. You could sell the farm, use the money to travel. It is my family's legacy, Callum said, running his fingers through the grass. My father built that farm from nothing, cleared the land himself, constructed every building with his own hands. My mother planted the first seeds, raised the first chickens. How can I just walk away from that? But if you are unhappy— I am not unhappy, Callum interrupted gently. Just lonely. There is a difference. I love the work, love the land, love the life I have built. I just wish I had someone to share it with. The weight of those words hung in the air between them, and Gara felt her breath catch. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Was it possible that he felt the same pull she did, the same sense of connection and possibility? Before she could find the courage to ask, Callum reached over and took her hand. Gara, I know we have only just met. I know this is all happening very quickly, but I cannot stop thinking about you. Ever since last night you have been in my head, and I find myself wanting to know everything about you. What you dream about, what makes you laugh, what you look like when you first wake up in the morning. Is that completely insane? If it is, then we are both insane, Gara whispered. Because I have been thinking the exact same things. Callum shifted closer, and Gara's heart began to race. He reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and cupped her face with his hand. His palm was warm against her cheek, his touch gentle and reverent. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. Gara nodded, not trusting her voice, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was sweet and careful, a question more than a demand. Gara had never been kissed before. Orc courtship rituals were different, more aggressive and physical, and she was terrified of hurting him with her strength or her tusks. But Callum kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured, and she felt herself melting into it. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Callum rested his forehead against hers. I should probably tell you that I am completely out of my depth here, he admitted. I have no idea what I am doing or how this is supposed to work. All I know is that I do not want to stop seeing you. Neither do I, Gara said fervently. But Callum, people will talk. They already are after last night. Your reputation, let them talk, Callum said firmly. I do not care what small-minded people think. I care about you. I care about this, whatever this is between us. The rest we will figure out as we go. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that meadow, talking and kissing and simply being together. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they walked slowly back toward their respective farms, hands linked. Neither wanting to let go. Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Gara would finish her work at the Merrick farm, and Callum would complete his evening chores, and then they would meet sometimes in the meadow, sometimes by the river that ran between their properties, once in the forest, where Gara showed him a family of deer she had been observing. They talked and laughed and shared their days, and slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not without challenges. Word of their relationship spread through Millbrook like wildfire, and reactions were mixed at best. Some people, like Thomas and Maeve, were supportive and happy for Callum. Others were openly hostile, crossing the street to avoid him, or making pointed comments when he came to town for supplies. Edmund and his friends escalated from verbal harassment to leaving dead animals on Callum's porch and painting crude insults on his barn. Callum bore it all with quiet dignity, refusing to rise to their provocations. But Gara saw how it wore on him, saw the tension in his shoulders and the weariness in his eyes. She offered multiple times to step back, to end their courtship so his life could return to normal, but Callum refused to even consider it. They do not get to decide who I care about, he told her firmly one evening as they sat by the river. They do not get to dictate my happiness through threats and vandalism. If I give in to their hatred, then they win, and I will not let that happen. You are the bravest person I have ever met, Gara said softly, watching the way the setting sun turned his hair to gold. Not brave, Callum corrected. Just in love. It was the first time either of them had used that word, and it hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. You love me? Gara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Callum turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Yes. I love you, Gara. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you see the best in people even when they show you their worst. I love the way you laugh when the Merrick children tell you silly jokes, and the way you concentrate when you are carving wood. I love how gentle you are despite your power, and how fierce you can be when protecting those you care about. I love everything about you. Gara felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. I love you too, she managed through the emotion clogging her throat. I never thought I would find this. I never thought anyone would see me as something other than a monster. But you see me, Callum. You really see me. And I love you so much it frightens me. They came together in a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before, pouring all their feelings into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gara rested her head on Callum's shoulder and let herself imagine a future where this was possible, where they could be together without fear or judgment. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most beautiful dreams. The trouble started on a warm evening in late spring. Callum had invited Gara to his farm for dinner, wanting to share his space with her the way she had shown him her favorite places in the forest and fields. They had just finished eating and were washing dishes together when Callum heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. He looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. At least a dozen men on horseback were riding up his lane, torches blazing in the gathering darkness. He recognized many of them, Edmund, Pierce, and Garrett in the lead, along with several other young men from Millbrook and the surrounding farms. Gara, you need to hide, Callum said urgently, turning from the window. But Gara was already moving toward the door, her expression set and determined. No, I will not cower while they threaten you. Gara, please, we face this together, she said firmly, taking his hand. They stepped out onto the porch together as the riders circled the farmyard, their horses snorting and stamping. Edmund dismounted and strode forward, his face twisted with righteous anger. This has gone on long enough, Quinn, he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. You have disgraced yourself and this community by consorting with that creature. We are here to put an end to it. You have no right to tell me who I can or cannot see, Callum replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Gara has done nothing wrong. She is a peaceful, hard-working woman who deserves respect, not harassment. She is an orc, Pierce shouted from his horse. They killed my uncle in the raids. And I told you those raids were committed by human bandits, Callum shot back. The truth came out months ago. You are choosing to ignore it because it is easier to hate than to admit you were wrong. Truth or not, she does not belong here, Garrett added. And neither do you if you continue this shameful relationship. We are giving you a choice, Quinn. Send her away, swear to never see her again, and we will leave you in peace. Refuse, and we will take matters into our own hands. Gara stepped forward, and despite the danger, despite the angry men and burning torches, her voice was calm and clear. You do not need to do this, Callum. These are your people, your community. I am just one person. It is not worth losing everything for me. Callum turned to look at her, at this incredible woman who was willing to sacrifice her own happiness to protect him, and felt his love for her swell to almost painful intensity. You are not just one person to me, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You are everything. and I would rather stand alone with you than be welcomed by people who demand I abandon my principles and my heart." He turned back to Edmund and the others. "I choose Gara. I will always choose her. If that means I am no longer welcome in Millbrook, so be it. But I will not send her away, and I will not stop loving her because you tell me to." Edmund's face flushed red with fury. "Then you are both exiled. You have 3 days to sell your farm and leave this region. If you are still here after that, we will burn this place to the ground with or without you in it." The mob turned and rode away, leaving Callum and Gara standing in the dusty farmyard, watching their torches disappear into the night. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gara turned to Callum, her expression anguished. "What have I done? This farm is your entire life, your family's legacy. I have destroyed everything." "You have destroyed nothing," Callum said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "They made their choice and I made mine. I do not regret it, Gara. I will never regret choosing you. But where will we go? What will we do?" Callum pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "We will figure it out together. Maybe we will start over somewhere else, somewhere less hostile. Maybe we will stay and dare them to follow through on their threats. I do not know yet. But we will decide together, because that is what people who love each other do." Gara buried her face in his shoulder and let herself cry. Let herself release all the fear and guilt and overwhelming emotion she had been holding in. Callum held her through it all, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances, and despite everything, despite the threats and the uncertainty, she felt safe. They spent that night talking, weighing their options, trying to figure out what came next. Selling the farm in 3 days would be nearly impossible, and even if Callum could find a buyer, he would get a fraction of what it was worth. They could try to stay and call Edmund's bluff, but that risked serious violence. Or they could simply leave, abandon everything and start fresh somewhere new. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they still had not reached a decision. Callum was exhausted, his eyes burning from lack of sleep, but he felt oddly peaceful. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The solution, when it came, arrived from an unexpected source. 2 days after the confrontation, Callum was in his barn trying to decide what possessions he could carry and what he would have to leave behind when he heard horses approaching again. His hand instinctively went to the pitchfork leaning against the wall, but when he looked out, he saw not an angry mob but a single wagon driven by Edith Merrick, with her 2 children sitting beside her. Callum stepped out of the barn as Edith pulled the wagon to a stop. The middle-aged woman climbed down with practiced ease, her worn dress and calloused hands marking her as someone who had worked hard all her life. "Mr. Quinn," she said with a nod of greeting. "I heard about what happened. Where is Gara?" "Inside, packing," Callum replied cautiously. "Why?" "Because I have a proposition for both of you," Edith said. "Can we speak together?" Callum called for Gara, and she emerged from the house looking wary but curious. When she saw Edith, her expression softened with genuine affection. The 2 women embraced quickly, and then Edith got straight to business. "I have been thinking about my farm," she began. "It is too much for me to manage alone, even with Gara's help. I have 20 acres, mostly cleared with good soil and a reliable water source. But I am getting older and my children are still too young to be much help with the heavy work. I need partners, not just hired help." She looked between Callum and Gara. "What if you 2 joined me? We could work the land together, share the profits equally. There is room enough to build another house on the property, give you privacy but keep us close enough to help each other. We would be stronger together than any of us are alone." Callum felt hope kindle in his chest. "That is incredibly generous, but what about your neighbors?" "You already face prejudice for employing Gara. If we all live and work together, let them be prejudiced, Edith said with surprising steel in her voice. My late husband taught me that the opinions of small-minded people matter far less than living with integrity. Besides, Gara is family to me and my children. If you love her and she loves you, then you are family too. Family looks out for each other. Gara was crying again, tears of joy this time, and she swept Edith into a hug that lifted the smaller woman clean off her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "What about this farm?" Callum asked, looking around at the land his father had built. "I cannot just abandon it." "You can lease it," Edith suggested. "Find a trustworthy tenant who will work it and pay you a portion of the harvest. That way you maintain ownership, but do not have to stay where you are not wanted. And who knows? Perhaps in a few years, when tempers have cooled and people have had time to see that you and Gara are not the monsters they fear, you could return if you wanted to." It was a good plan, a practical plan. Callum found himself nodding slowly, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "I would need to find the right person, someone I trust. I might know someone," Edith said. "My brother lost his farm 2 winters ago to a flood. He has been working as hired help for others, but he is a good farmer and an honest man. I could ask if he would be interested." Over the next few hours, they worked out the details. Edith's brother, Henry, came by that afternoon and agreed to lease the farm on generous terms. Callum would retain ownership of the land and buildings, and Henry would pay him a quarter of the harvest each year plus maintain the property. It was not perfect, but it was better than selling at a desperate price or watching the farm be destroyed. With that settled, Callum and Gara spent the next week moving their possessions to the Merrick farm and beginning construction on a small house at the edge of Edith's property. The work was hard but satisfying, and Callum found himself enjoying the collaboration with Gara as they planned their home together. True to her word, Edith treated them as partners and family. They shared meals together each evening, the children chattering about their day while the adults discussed farming strategies and divided labor. Lily and James were delighted to have Gara living so close, and they quickly adopted Callum as well, begging him to tell them stories about his time in the militia. The hostility from the wider community did not disappear overnight. When Edith brought her produce to market with Gara and Callum in tow, they faced cold shoulders and refused sales. But there were also small kindnesses, a merchant who quietly sold them seed at a fair price, a traveling tinker who shared news from other settlements, a few families who began to question whether the prejudice they had been taught was really justified. Maeve and Thomas visited regularly, offering support and friendship. Thomas even helped with the house construction, his blacksmithing skills proving invaluable for creating hinges and fixtures. Maeve brought food and gossip from Millbrook, reporting that opinion about Callum and Gara's relationship remained divided, but that Edmund's influence was waning as people grew tired of his anger and rhetoric. As spring turned to summer, Callum and Gara's house took shape, a modest but sturdy structure with 2 rooms and a sleeping loft. They worked on it together in the evenings after the day's farming was done, and Callum found a deep satisfaction in building something that was truly theirs, not inherited or leased, but created by their own hands and effort. One evening, as they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Gara turned to Callum with an expression of such contentment that it took his breath away. "I am happy," she said simply. "For the first time since I left my clan, I am truly happy. I have work that matters, people who care about me, and you, I have you, and that makes everything worthwhile." Callum took her hand, marveling as always at how perfectly it fit with his despite the size difference. "I am happy too," happier than I have ever been. This was not the life I imagined for myself, but it is better than anything I could have planned. Do you ever regret it? Gara asked quietly. Giving up your farm, becoming an outsider in your own community, all for me. Never, Callum said firmly. Not for one single moment. You are worth everything I gave up and more. Besides, I did not really give anything up. I gained far more than I lost: a partner, a family, a future I actually want to live. Gara leaned down and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Callum felt his heart swell with love. When they pulled apart, he took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "There is something I want to ask you," he said. "Something I have been thinking about for a while now." Gara looked at him with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "What is it?" Callum reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object he had been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. It was a ring, simple and handmade, that he had crafted from a piece of silver he had traded for at the last market. The band was inscribed with a pattern of intertwining vines, representing growth and connection. "Marry me," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "I know we come from different worlds, and I know there will be challenges ahead, but I want to face them all with you. I want you to be my wife, my partner in everything. I want to build a life with you, raise a family if we are blessed with children, grow old together watching sunsets just like this one. So what do you say, Gara? Will you marry me?" Gara stared at the ring, then at him, her eyes wide and shining with tears. "You want to marry me? An orc woman? You are willing to bind your life to mine so completely?" "I already am bound to you," Callum said softly. "The ring is just a symbol of what already exists in my heart." "I love you, Gara. I will always love you. Please say yes." "Yes," Gara breathed, then louder, more certain. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Callum slipped the ring onto her finger. It barely fit, made for human proportions, but Gara did not seem to care. She pulled him into her arms and kissed him deeply, and Callum felt like he could fly. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, they heard cheering from the direction of Edith's house. Callum looked over to see Edith, Lily, and James standing on the porch, having clearly witnessed the entire proposal. The children were jumping up and down with excitement, and Edith was wiping tears from her own eyes. "I guess we have our first wedding guests," Gara said with a laugh. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on the Merrick farm, in the meadow where Callum and Gara had shared their first kiss. It was a small ceremony. Edith and her children, Maeve and Thomas, a few other friends who had proven their loyalty and open-mindedness over the months. Notably absent was anyone from Callum's extended family or most of Millbrook, but Callum found he did not care. The people who mattered most were there, and that was enough. Edith had helped Gara make a simple but beautiful dress from cream-colored fabric, and Maeve had woven wildflowers into Gara's hair. Callum wore his best clothes, the same blue shirt he had worn on their first date, and his hands shook as he stood waiting for Gara to walk through the flowers toward him. When she appeared, she took his breath away. She moved with careful grace, conscious of her size and strength, but there was a radiance about her that had nothing to do with her physical appearance. She was happy, deeply and truly happy, and it showed in every line of her face. They had decided to blend elements of both human and orcish wedding traditions for the ceremony. Maeve, acting as officiant, spoke about the courage it took to love across boundaries, about the strength required to choose your own path despite opposition. Then, following orcish custom, Callum and Gara each shared a story about why they had chosen the other. Callum spoke about the first moment he saw Gara walk into the tavern, about the vulnerability in her eyes and the strength in her bearing. He talked about how she had challenged everything he thought he knew about orcs and about love. how she had shown him that true courage meant following your heart even when the world told you to close it. Gara, her voice thick with emotion, described how Callum had defended her when he had no reason to, how he had seen her as a person when everyone else saw only a monster. She spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his unwavering support even when it cost him dearly. She promised to love him, honor him, and stand beside him through whatever challenges life brought their way. When Maeve pronounced them married, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Callum pulled Gara down into a kiss that felt like a promise and a celebration all at once. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, he saw that everyone was crying, even young James, who had previously declared crying to be something only babies did. The celebration that followed was joyful and intimate. Edith had prepared a feast with contributions from everyone, and they ate and drank and danced as the sun set and the stars came out. Lily convinced Gara to dance with her, the little girl standing on the orc woman's feet as Gara carefully swayed to hummed music. Thomas and Callum arm wrestled, much to everyone's amusement, and Maeve told embarrassing stories from Callum's childhood. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away to their homes, Callum and Gara walked hand in hand to their new house. It was finished now, complete with furniture they had made together and small touches that made it feel like home. Gara's wood carvings on the mantel, Callum's books on a shelf by the window, curtains sewn by Edith in a cheerful yellow fabric. Callum lit candles while Gara closed the door behind them, and then they simply stood looking at each other, husband and wife, the enormity of what they had done settling over them. "We did it," Gara said softly. "We actually did it." "We did," Callum agreed, moving closer to her. "And I do not regret one single moment." That night, they came together as husband and wife, their love expressed in touch and whispered words, and the profound intimacy of truly being seen and accepted completely. Gara was careful with her strength, afraid of hurting him, but Callum trusted her absolutely. He explored the differences between them, the warmth of her green skin, the sharp edges of her tusks, the incredible power contained in her body, and found every bit of her beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, Callum's head resting on Gara's shoulder, her arms wrapped protectively around him. "I love you," Gara murmured into his hair. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Callum replied, pressing a kiss to her collarbone. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us. Thank you for being brave enough to hope that love could cross the boundaries that divide our peoples." "We are proof that it can," Gara said. "Maybe not everyone will understand or accept it, but we know the truth. Love is stronger than prejudice, stronger than fear. As long as we have each other, we can face anything." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Callum dreamed of a future filled with possibilities he had never dared to imagine before. The seasons turned, and life on the Merrick farm settled into a comfortable rhythm. Callum and Gara worked the land together, their combined efforts producing abundant harvests. Edith's partnership proved invaluable, her years of experience complementing their physical labor and enthusiasm. The farm thrived under their joint stewardship. Slowly, painfully slowly, attitudes in the wider community began to shift. It started small, a neighbor who asked Callum for advice about a sick cow and stayed for tea. A merchant who, after months of cold shoulders, finally acknowledged that Gara had never caused any trouble and maybe deserved basic courtesy. A family from a neighboring settlement who visited specifically because they had heard stories of the human-orc marriage and wanted to see for themselves that such a thing was possible. Not everyone changed their minds. Edmund and his core group of followers remained hostile, though their influence waned as time passed, and it became clear that Gara posed no threat to anyone. Some people would likely never accept the marriage, would always see Callum as a traitor and Gara as a monster. But the wall of universal opposition began to crack, and through those cracks, understanding could begin to grow. A year after their wedding, Gara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Human orc children were rare, spoken of in stories but seldom seen. She had no idea what to expect, no model for how such a pregnancy might progress. But Edith, ever practical, found a traveling healer who had experience with mixed heritage births, and the old woman agreed to visit regularly to monitor Gara's health. Callum was over the moon with excitement, immediately beginning plans to expand their house to accommodate a child. He built a cradle from oak wood, and Gara carved animals into the headboard: a horse, a rabbit, a deer. Lily and James were thrilled at the prospect of a baby, asking endless questions and offering to help in any way they could. The pregnancy was not easy. Gara's body struggled with the hybrid nature of the child, and there were several scares that left everyone frightened. But she was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and she endured with the same quiet determination she brought to everything in her life. On a cold winter night, 7 months after they first learned of the pregnancy, Gara went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the traveling healer, Edith and Maeve, while Callum paced outside in a panic that Thomas and Henry had to physically restrain him from interrupting. When the baby's first cry split the night air, Callum nearly collapsed with relief. Maeve emerged from the bedroom, her face exhausted but glowing with joy. "You have a daughter," she announced, "and she is perfect." Callum rushed inside to find Gara propped up against pillows, looking equally exhausted and radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. When Gara pulled back the fabric, Callum got his first look at his daughter and felt his heart expand to impossible dimensions. She was small, smaller than a full orc baby would be, but larger than a typical human infant. Her skin was a soft, pale green, like new spring leaves. She had wispy dark hair and small, barely visible tusks just beginning to emerge from her gums. Her ears were slightly pointed. When she opened her eyes, they were a striking amber color that seemed to glow in the candlelight. "She is beautiful," Callum whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch his daughter's tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around his instinctively, and he felt tears streaming down his face. "She is absolutely beautiful. We made her," Gara said wonderingly. "We created this perfect little person together." They named her Sira, which meant bright star in the old human tongue. She was indeed a bright star in their lives, bringing joy and purpose and occasional sleepless nights. The hybrid nature of her heritage became more apparent as she grew. She was stronger than human babies, reaching developmental milestones faster. But she was also smaller and less aggressive than full orc infants. She seemed to embody the best of both peoples, and Callum found himself hoping that she might represent a new possibility, a future where the boundaries between humans and orcs could blur and eventually disappear. News of Sira's birth spread through the region quickly. Some reacted with disgust or horror, calling her an abomination and predicting doom for any community that tolerated such a creature. But others were curious, even hopeful. A few brave souls asked to meet her, and Callum and Gara cautiously allowed visitors, carefully screening for genuine interest versus hostile intent. One such visitor arrived on a spring afternoon when Sira was 6 months old. He was an orc, massively built with scarred green skin and wearing the traditional garb of a clan chief. Gara recognized him immediately and felt her entire body go rigid with shock. "Father," she breathed. Thorgak of the Stonefist clan stood in the doorway of their home, his expression unreadable. He looked at Gara, then at Callum, then down at the baby playing on a blanket at their feet. "I heard rumors," Thorgak said in the deep, rumbling voice Gara remembered from her childhood. "Rumors that my daughter had married a human, that she had borne a half-breed child. I came to see if the rumors were true." Callum moved protectively closer to Gara and Sira, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. But Gara placed a hand on his arm, stilling him. "They are true," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside her. "This is my husband, Callum Quinn. And this is our daughter, Sira. Why are you here, father?" Thorgak was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the baby. Sira, unaware of the tension, babbled happily and reached for her own toes. "I was wrong," Thorgak said finally, the words seeming to cost him great effort. "When you argued for peace between our peoples, I called you foolish and naive. I believed the old ways were the only ways, that humans and orcs could never coexist. I exiled you from our clan for your beliefs." He paused, his massive hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "But I have watched the consequences of my choices. Other young orcs have begun to question the old ways, inspired by your courage. Some have left the clan to seek their own paths. And I have had to ask myself if I was preserving our culture or simply perpetuating hatred." He took a step closer, and Callum tensed, but Thorgak made no threatening moves. Instead, he knelt down, bringing himself closer to eye level with the baby. "She is beautiful," he said softly. "She looks like you did as an infant, Gara, strong and fierce, even when she was small." He looked up at his daughter, and Callum was shocked to see tears in the old orc's eyes. "I am sorry. I am sorry I cast you out, sorry I did not support you when you needed me. You were braver than I was, wise enough to see past the boundaries of clan and species. Can you ever forgive me?" Gara stood frozen, clearly struggling with a flood of emotions. Then Sira made a happy gurgling sound and reached out toward Thorgak, her tiny hands grasping at the air. The gesture seemed to break something loose in Gara, and she moved forward, kneeling beside her father. "I forgive you," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I never stopped loving you, father, even when you sent me away. I never stopped hoping that one day you might understand." Thorgak pulled his daughter into a crushing hug, and Gara returned it with equal force. Callum stood watching, his own throat tight with emotion, as the two orcs reconciled after more than 2 years of separation. When they finally pulled apart, Thorgak turned to Callum. "You are my daughter's husband, which makes you my family, whether either of us would have chosen it or not. I am told you defended her honor, that you sacrificed your standing in your own community for her. That speaks of character. I would know you better." Callum extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting, and after a moment's hesitation, Thorgak took it. His grip was like iron, but he was careful not to crush Callum's smaller hand. "You are welcome in our home," Callum said. "Any family of Gara's is family of mine." Thorgak stayed for 3 days, getting to know his son-in-law and granddaughter. He and Callum had long conversations about farming, about leadership, about the challenges of changing deeply ingrained beliefs. He played with Sira, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he carved a small wooden horse for her, a gift that made Gara cry with nostalgia for the toys he had made for her in her own childhood. Before he left, Thorgak made a declaration that would have far-reaching consequences. "I am changing the laws of the Stonefist clan," he announced. "No longer will association with humans be grounds for exile. Those who seek peace and understanding will be welcomed, not punished." and those who wish to build families across species boundaries will have the clan's protection, not its condemnation. He looked at Gara, pride evident in his expression. You started something when you left, daughter. You proved that another way was possible. Now it is time for the rest of us to follow your example. News of Thorgak's change of heart spread quickly through both human and orc communities. It did not solve all problems overnight. Centuries of hatred and mistrust could not be erased with a single declaration. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of separation that had divided the peoples for so long. More mixed couples began to emerge, cautiously at first, testing the new boundaries. Some faced fierce resistance, but others found unexpected support. Slowly, painfully slowly, a new normal began to establish itself. Callum and Gara's farm became something of a meeting place for these new couples, a safe space where they could share experiences and support each other. Edith welcomed them all, her generosity and open-mindedness never wavering. The farm thrived not just agriculturally, but as a community, a living example of what was possible when people chose love over fear. 3 years after Sira's birth, Gara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Corwin and Lyra. The births were easier this time, Gara's body having adapted to carrying hybrid children. The twins were healthy and strong, and Sira was thrilled to have siblings to play with. Callum's life had become something he never could have imagined that evening when Maeve had told him about a blind date. He had a wife he adored, 3 beautiful children, a thriving farm, and a community that was slowly but surely learning to see past old prejudices. He had lost some things, his original farm, though he still owned it and received income from Henry's lease, his place in Millbrook's social structure, relationships with people who could not accept his choices, but what he had gained was infinitely more valuable. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Gara turned to Callum with a soft smile. "You remember our first date?" she asked. "When I walked into that tavern and everyone stared at me like I was a monster." "I remember," Callum said, taking her hand. "I also remember thinking you were the most interesting person I had ever seen, even though I was terrified." "I was terrified too," Gara admitted. "I almost turned around and left. But then you stood up and called me over, and you looked at me like I was a person, not a curiosity or a threat. That was the moment everything changed for me." "For me too," Callum said. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, though I did not know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Sira helped Corwin climb onto a low tree branch while Lyra toddled after a butterfly. Edith emerged from her house with a basket of fresh bread, and Lily and James, now teenagers, were arguing good-naturedly about something as they carried water from the well. "We built something good here," Gara said softly. "Not just a farm or a family, but a future. A better future than either of us had any right to hope for." "We did," Callum agreed. "And it started because my meddlesome sister arranged a blind date." Gara laughed, that warm, rich sound that still made Callum's heart skip a beat even after all these years. "Remind me to thank her again." "She will never let us forget how right she was," Callum warned with a grin. "Let her gloat," Gara said, squeezing his hand. "She gave me everything I ever wanted. She gave me you." As the sun set over their farm, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Callum reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had not been easy. There had been moments of fear, of pain, of genuine danger. They had lost things and people along the way, had faced hatred and opposition that sometimes felt overwhelming. But they had also found something precious and rare, a love that transcended the boundaries society had tried to impose, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. a family that represented hope for a better future. Sierra came running up to the porch, her amber eyes bright with excitement. "Mama, Papa, come see." Corwin climbed all the way to the second branch. Callum and Gara stood, allowing their daughter to pull them toward the tree where their son was perched proudly. As they walked hand in hand across the yard they had built together, Callum felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He had never expected a towering orc with a shy smile when his sister arranged that blind date. He had never imagined the challenges they would face or the joy they would find. But he would not change a single moment of it, because every struggle and every triumph had led him here, to this moment, to this family, to this life. And as he lifted his son down from the tree while Gara swung Sierra onto her shoulders and Lyra demanded her turn, Callum knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of how they met the human farmer and the exiled orc, brought together by a meddlesome sister, and a risky gamble on love, would be told and retold in the region for generations. It would inspire other couples to take their own chances, to reach across boundaries they had been taught were impassable. It would not solve all problems or erase all prejudice, but it would plant seeds of hope and understanding that would continue to grow. But those larger impacts were concerns for another day. For now, Callum was content to simply live in this moment, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, grateful for the unexpected paths that had led him to happiness. As night fell and they gathered around the dinner table, Callum, Gara, their children, Edith, Lily, and James sharing food and stories and laughter, Callum caught Gara's eye across the table. She smiled at him, that same shy smile she had given him on their first date, and he smiled back. No words were needed. They both knew how lucky they were, how precious this life they had built together truly was. They had taken a chance on each other when the world told them not to, and they had won something more valuable than gold, a love that would last a lifetime and beyond, a family that bridged two worlds, and a future full of endless possibilities. And it had all started with his sister arranging a blind date, and him never expecting a towering orc with a shy smile to walk into his life and change everything forever. Years later, when Sierra was old enough to understand, she would ask her parents to tell the story of how they met. Callum and Gara would take turns narrating, filling in details and laughing at the memories. They would tell her about the hostile tavern, about the meadow where they first kissed, about the mob that tried to tear them apart, and the choices they made to stay together. And Sierra, along with her siblings, would grow up knowing that love was stronger than fear, that courage meant choosing connection over comfort, and that the most beautiful things in life often came from the most unexpected places. The Quinn family became a fixture in the region, known and respected by humans and orcs alike. Their farm prospered, their children thrived, and their love never wavered. They faced challenges. Of course, life was never without struggles, but they faced them together, as they had always done. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Callum and Gara would return to that meadow where they had first kissed, where they had later been married. They would sit among the wildflowers and remember how it all began, and they would give thanks for the meddlesome sister, the blind date, and the towering orc with a shy smile who had walked into a hostile tavern and changed one man's life forever. Their story was one of hope, of courage, of love triumphing over hatred. It was a story that deserved to be told, to be remembered, to inspire others to take their own leaps of faith. But most importantly, it was their story, unique, precious, and absolutely true. And they lived it together, every single day, building a legacy of love that would echo through generations to come. The end came not with drama or tragedy, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Callum and Gara grew old together, watching their children have children of their own, seeing the world around them slowly transform into something kinder and more accepting. They never regretted their choices, never wished they had taken the easier path. Because the path they had chosen, difficult as it was, had led them to each other. And that made every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of fear or pain absolutely worthwhile. In the end, love had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything.